I had a lot of friends that were conventional farmers, and I knew that we did not have the kinds of problems that they did, and I knew that we didn't have the kind of safety and risk issues from, skull and crossbones, wounds, poisons, those kinds of things. And I think the direct marketing, which is a key component of this, put me right in touch with my customers. It encouraged to be an entrepreneur and to think about the customer first. What are the needs of the customer, rather than how can I produce more, but rather how can I make a happy, healthy, satisfied customer. I know that the average farmer doesn't think about those kinds of things. They're just thinking about volume and bushels and feeding the world, but not necessarily can we feed the world well. I think a lot of people say, boy, you're so innovative, how did you come up with all this stuff? And I just explained that there really aren't very many principles. When you look at nature, they're pretty simple. For example, nature's based on perennials, not annuals. Nature's equity, ecological equity, is in perennials, not annuals, because nobody's around to plant stuff. And so Dad, early on, understood the value of perennials, whether it's orchard, nut crops, grasses, forages, as opposed to annuals like grain that require tillage and annual planting. And so early on, very early on, secondly, animals move. In nature, animals move. We live in a time in our culture when our greatest, agricultural minds at the U.S. Don't think animals should move. They should be locked up in houses and corrals and, in their own species and fecal particulate to breathe. And so if animals are going to move, well, then you have to have a way to control them so they don't get on the neighbors. You have to have a way to shelter them with portable shelter, not stationary shelter. And you have to have water wherever they move. You can't just have stationary, water places. So this idea that animals move sets up an entire, domino effect of innovation to accommodate animals moving. And then the next thing you notice is, nature doesn't use chemicals. It doesn't use chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. So if you're not going to do that, well, how are you going to grow things without that? So you immediately look at nature's template, and guess what? You find carbon. It's all carbon-based. It's all about biomass generated on-site. The solar cycle, solar energy makes carbon or biomass. The biomass decomposes either through the gut of an animal or through, composting, through just direct decomposition, and then that feeds the soil and makes the soil healthy so that it's able to grow more biomass to translate more solar energy, and the more biomass it's a continuing positive regenerative cycle. So when we saw that, well, then we started looking at, how can we compost? And so we began the large-scale composting, bought a wood chipper, and said, well, can we incorporate our forest with the open land and let the forest become a carbon sink, a carbon source? And so that got us down the road of silviculture, forestry management, and using wood products, fibrous products to augment, the field work. Another principle is that in nature, animals do the work. The choreography of symbiosis between different kinds of species, they work together, and so that developed into, instead of using grubicides and parasiticides for the cows, we use chickens to follow, like birds follow the egret on the rhino's nose, the birds that follow the herbivores in nature. And so the eggmobile was developed as a natural template to let the birds follow the herbivores and debug, sanitize, scratch out the cow pats and fertilize the ground. We built compost, not with big machinery and compost turners and petroleum, but with pigerators. We put corn in the bedding, and then the corn ferments and the anaerobic bedding pack. The pigs go in and they inject the oxygen and turn it, and so we call this pigerator compost, where pigs have aerated it and oxygenated. There aren't but about 5 or 6 of these basic big principles in nature, latch onto those, they fundamentally affect the entire, the entire production thing. The farm production model is simply a manifestation of how you view the world, how you view ecology, and the fact that our greater agricultural template in the Western world is a mechanical view toward life, and can we just view it as a factory, input, output, and mechanics, and manipulate it however we want to, without any moral or spiritual ramifications, is an incredible return, if you will, or manifestation of the conquistador mentality that we just we go and we conquer, as opposed to we come alongside nature as a nurturer. Our mission statement is to develop agricultural prototypes that are environmentally, emotionally, and economically enhancing, and facilitate their duplication throughout the world. I can assure you, I had no intentions of becoming a mouthpiece. We just wanted to farm. It's been a journey. We did not map this out or say we want to be here in 10 years, 20 years. No. We just said we want to be a successful farmer. And what I say is, the tragedy of our day is that we should be the normal. There should be thousands and thousands of us. We should not be an anomaly. That's the bittersweet part of this. So nothing gives me more joy than to meet a family, and there are now thousands of them who come up to me and say, we're farming today because of you. So the fact is that the average age of America's farmers is almost 60 years old. We're just shy of 60 years old. According to business axioms, Wall Street, any economic sector in which the average practitioner is more than 35 years old is an economic sector in decline. So the point being that the agricultural sector is a declining economic sector. And so when we look at the actuarials, what we see is that in the next 15 years, roughly 50% of all of America's agricultural assets are going to change hands. That's an amazing statistic. The question is, is all that land and equity going to be gobbled up by, the Chinese, Japanese, the Russians? Is that what's going to happen? With ever larger conglomerates and more, driverless tractors run by GPS with a console 1,000 miles away? Or is this equity going to be, can I say, gobbled up or metabolized, assimilated by a new wave of young, land-caressing, customer-loving, carbon-centric, local-oriented, neighbor-friendly, aesthetically, aromatically, sensually romantic young farmers? And so right now, what keeps me up at night is how to inspire, motivate, and encourage our best and brightest young people. This is not a vocation for dimwits and idiots. And I think, frankly, that when fewer and fewer people have their hands in the soil and participate in the wonder of visceral ecological networking, that we actually become a very unreasonable culture. Farming is noble and sacred and exciting enough and can pay enough to attract the best and brightest. There's no apologies. You don't have to be embarrassed about wanting to be a farmer. This is the greatest life in the world. Number two, you older farmers, open your heart, embrace a young person, bring on a young partner, and that's the best way that you can leave a true land ecological legacy for the next generation. What you'll hear when you talk to the conventional ag organizations is that the number one impediment to young farmers getting started is capital. From my perspective, the number one impediment is regulatory, because the regulations, whether it's food safety regulations, zoning regulations, banking regulations that keep you from being able to get capital for harebrained ideas, all of these kinds of regulations make it more and more difficult for newbies, for wannabes to be able to get in. All the regulations make it very easy for the status quo to continue to operate very, very well. Regulations always impede innovation. I hope it goes without saying that young people coming into farming is innovation. The regulatory climate requiring you to have large infrastructure and expensive licenses, hard to meet paperwork overhead, insurance requirements, product liability insurance, those kinds of regulatory requirements are absolutely the number one impediment to young people getting into farming. And there's an incredibly a stigma. There's a social prejudicial stigma against an agricultural vocation in our culture. Who do I want on the land? Do I really want D students running my air, soil, and water? Or would I rather have the best and brightest in charge of my air, soil, and water? Well, we need an emancipation proclamation on this food thing. We need to be able to, for the citizens, to be able to, by right, get the food of their choice from the source of their choice. I mean, these are such basic human rights that they weren't even put in the Bill of Rights because, the founders couldn't have imagined the day when you couldn't, butcher a chicken and sell it to a neighbor. If nobody in Virginia ate at McDonald's and Burger King for 3 days, it would bring the entire industrial food system to its knees. That's how fragile it is. So number one, get in your kitchen. Number two, become viscerally participatory in the food system. And what that means is you either grow something yourself, and I'm a huge advocate of, start growing something yourself. But beyond that, know your farmer. Forget the Disney vacation and go take that recreational budget and time and money, budget, and go, visit a couple farmers in the area. Every single area is surrounded by really, really high-quality, integrity farmers that are desperate for 10, 15, 20 more customers that may be the difference between them being able to leave their town job and be on the farm full-time. Go find them, patronize them, and heal the world one bite at a time.